Hello, everybody, and welcome to CUTV News. This is the show where we celebrate and showcase some of the most amazing people around the world who are doing great things to make our world a better place. My guest today is Poli. Lauren is many things, a certified speech language pathologist who runs a hospital department. She's also a coach who empowers college students, individuals, and business people. She's a gifted speaker and author as well. She's also a true inspiration, someone who stirs people to be more proactive, to find their way, and to make the proverbial lemonade out of the lemons in life that we're handed. Lauren knows this all too well, as she was handed quite a few lemons throughout her own life over the years. One of the most notable was her mental health diagnosis at a young age. Now, back then, there were no holistic practitioners to recommend healthy alternatives like meditation, and she spent much of her life in maintenance mode. Now, her recent memoir, The Other Side of Bipolar, relates Lauren's life story as she emerged from sickness and heavy medication and learned to love and trust herself. And she also developed her unique strengths. Now, coming out on the other side, Lauren managed to pursue her master's degrees and then build multiple business interests as well. All wonderful accomplishments that sprung from one another. Lauren became a coach through Access Consciousness, which is an energetic space system with practical tools for everyday life. She's been a facilitator for them since 2011. She further developed her own self-assessment tool, which can be viewed on her website. She uses it to support clients as they examine their worth, dismiss labels, and find their direction. Poli joins me today on CUTV News to share her story with us, more about her amazing memoir, and her inspiration to help us all lead happy and thriving lives. Lauren, thanks so much for joining us here on CUTV News. We've done radio shows together on CUTV News Radio Live. That was extraordinary. It was wonderful having a chance to interview you there. And thanks for flying all across from the West Coast, all across the country here to the greater New York City tri-state area to join us here at our television studio for our one-on-one interview. You've got an amazing story, and I can't wait to share it with our audience. Thanks for being with us.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
So you flew across the country to join us, got a chance to also visit family along the way too, which is always a beautiful thing, right?
Yes, spent some time out in nature, got to see my nieces. It was a good time. Yeah.
Well, it's so great to have you here, and I have to tell you that I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people over the many years, and I find your story and your perspective, your wisdom, so deeply inspirational. You don't always come across people who are willing to share their story deeply, to open themselves up, to be vulnerable, to share the intimate details of their life. But I know for you, because you've become very resilient through the experiences you've had, professionally and personally, to the point that it's so extraordinarily important for you to share the story because you want to shine the light on others who might be going through things similar to what you've gone through. Let's talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about the book, we'll talk about the wonderful things you're doing in the career. But what led up to a lot of this and this outreach that you are so big in presenting to people is your story with the diagnosis early on in life at a younger age of a mental health diagnosis. Some people may hear that and not know what that really means, or they may have their own assessment of what that means. And tell us the point in your life when that was realized, and take us through what happened from there.
Yeah, I'd say everything was pretty much humdrumming along as normal adolescence is. I had a very easy childhood, a great family support system, and I kind of hit a stage where the noise of the world seemed like it got turned up. It's almost like someone had their hand on a dial switch, and before I knew it, the intensity of being an adolescent, being around other people who were gossiping and judging, just kind of made my world very loud. And I say that a lot, and some people, they don't quite get what that is. It's whenever you've entered into a room and all of a sudden it's like the energy of the room overpowers you, and the volume that other people are choosing to act on overtakes you. So I kind of felt like the entire environment was like that. So trying to deal with that was very difficult, especially being 14, not really having language to be able to say, things are a little intense, things are very uncomfortable. The more and more that went on, the more I stopped liking myself, which was very unusual for me. I was always a happy kid.
Yeah, sure.
So it was almost like when the dial turned up, this inner enemy woke up in my brain. And everything became about judging myself, how I didn't measure up, how I didn't fit in. And for the most part, I just got really confused. To have a really happy life and have it kind of turn upside down, not from a traumatic outer event, but just from this activation inside of me, it was very difficult to deal with.
Was there an initial trigger? Was there something that you can go back to and say, that was the trigger moment that did it? That person said that to me, or this happened to me, and that really brought me deeply into it? Or was it a series of things happening, and was there a lot of external forces, the other kids in school, which can always be rough, other things that are happening in your life that were just exacerbating it, making it worse?
Yeah, it's kind of a confluence of events. And I think so many people who've been through a traumatic experience, that's kind of the catalyst, and it's easy to point to. And because it's easy to point to, it's easy to speak about. And it's also easier to get help. For me, it wasn't that. It was just this like confluence of events. Like my first chapter of my book starts with me running wildly in the woods, just free and exploring. And again, childhood, that's what you do. And all of a sudden I ran across a group of kids, and they were looking at me weird. And it was almost like I could hear their voice and their judgment inside of my head of like, is she crazy? Why is she out here running wildly in the woods?
Right.
And it's almost, again, that activation of that inner enemy that comes up. And from then on, I started going, wait a second, maybe something isn't right. Maybe there is something that's a bit off. And I started to temper and measure myself.
Were you dealing with anxiety, depression? Were there symptoms that were starting to show as well? Were you withdrawing from participation in school events and interaction with friends and family? Was that starting to happen as well?
Well, it was interesting. I was a fantastic actress. I always say I mastered the role of Lauren, Happy Lauren, very, very well in those early moments where there was a lot of confusion and angst in my own world, but no one would know it from the outside. And I look at what's going on now with the teenage epidemic with suicide and anxiety and depression, and people are blindsided. It's because you don't have language to express it. It's not safe to really explore and share. So you end up shutting yourself down quite frequently. You put a happy face on, and you never really get resolution. And so I lived that way for months, and then things just got more intense from there.
Family, friends, teachers, relatives noticing this change, or did this happen? Were you dealing with this internally and struggling with it yourself, trying to figure out what's going on? This doesn't feel right. There's things happening, changing internally. Or was it something where you just dealt with it yourself, and then all of a sudden people started realizing it, noticing it?
I locked it up tight. And it's fascinating because I used to be at the guidance counselor's office almost every week at school, but I was never there for myself. I had two friends that were being abused at home, and one was being abused by her brother.
You were supporting them.
Well, and in my mind, they were in physical danger. There was a problem that could be pointed to, and because of that, there should be an easy resolution. It didn't even occur to me to speak up for myself and say, I'm lost, I'm confused, and I'm in pain. So I just locked it up, and I tried to internalize it and also try to figure it out until it just wasn't manageable anymore. And that's when my grades started to slip. I started to act out a bit differently. Mom went home, searched my room one day, and found my suicide letter.
Really?
And that was kind of the beginning of...
What was the diagnosis? Was there a specific diagnosis that they gave you?
I was diagnosed as bipolar, and it runs in my family. My aunt had it. So as soon as I was at the doctor's office and they were doing all the psychological testing, which was a whole day of picking everything apart,
Sure, yeah.
that was kind of the nail in the coffin. And it was fascinating talking to the doctor and watching him kind of puzzle piece me together. As soon as he heard that, it was like the stake in the ground. This must be what we're dealing with.
Let's define that. People might have heard that word, that terminology, bipolar, and they just think it's up and down. But how do you define what bipolar actually is from the medical and health standpoint?
From the medical perspective, bipolar, you have two ends of the extreme. So instead of unipolar depression where you're depressed, and that's not really sadness. That's like the gray emptiness of nothing.
Right.
Lack of interest, lack of energy, and again, really kind of down in the dump thoughts. You also have the other extreme as well. High energy, talking very fast, very impulsive behaviors, and sometimes you stay in one state for a couple months and then you swing the other way. I was a rapid cycler, which meant I went up and down and volleyed all over the place.
So were people trying to keep up with that? The family, the school teachers, when did they start noticing these changes and the mood swings and different things that were happening? And when was action from them starting to happen?
No one really noticed it before the diagnosis. I think they just thought it was kind of normal teenage ups and downs. I was very hyper and happy, and so that was really fun to be around.
And you were the great actress, too.
Yes. And so they never really saw the angsty part. That was the part that I hid. But then once the diagnosis came, the medicines came, it actually threw me a little more off kilter because I had so many chemicals going through my body. And then the ups and the downs got a bit harder. People start walking on eggshells around you. It actually got to the point after a couple years of not wanting to emote at all, because as soon as I was a little happy or a little sad, as is normal human condition, all of a sudden, are you okay?
Right.
Did you take your medicines today?
Right.
And it's the one thing I hear most from people who are dealing with this constant assessment from other people. So it gets very hard to really tune into yourself and relax into it.
So the diagnosis is made. Take us from there. What happens? Are you placed on different medicines, medications? What's the process like from there? I mean, you're 14 years old or so. You've got a lot of things to do and schoolwork and life to live. What are some of those first steps that are taken to help you through this?
Yeah, so I was pulled out of school early. There was about 2 months left to my 8th grade year. So they chose to pull me out of school so we could just focus on the psychiatric care.
Right.
So different medicines, weekly therapy, family therapy to kind of help them deal with it. It's kind of an interesting space. I don't think people who haven't gone through therapy before really know what occurs behind closed doors.
Right.
Having somebody really piece and comb through every ounce of you, and depending on the professional. I had some people who did that from a very caring way where I felt supported. Other ones, it was like I was a puzzle to be solved, and it felt like they were looking for what was wrong with me. And when anybody looks for something, they're gonna find it, and you're gonna give it to them.
Right.
And so eventually I just kind of fell in love with the label of it and went, this is my new identity. And I looped myself up in that. So if you wanted me to be upset and moody, that's what I was gonna be for you. So it's kind of an interesting thing that goes, especially I think with teenagers being diagnosed, because you don't really know yourself yet either.
No, you're developing, right?
Yeah.
Everything is still developing. So did they administer medications? Were you on medications for a period of time?
Oh, long time. Yeah, so at 14 they started right away, and that, I'd say the first 10 years, I would say they keep going, trying different medications, different combinations with it. At one point, I was swallowing 14 pills a day. And it was interesting because there were a couple that were for the quote-unquote mood disorder that you needed, but then I had so many side effects from it that they gave me more medicine to counteract the side effects.
So you don't get depressed, you don't get exhausted, all these different things.
Ups and downs, and then the unfortunate thing is the toll it takes on your body when you have that many chemicals going through. So I would say I was mismanaged for a long point. When I went away to college and I changed psychiatrists, the first thing they did was half my medicine. They said with your body weight and what you're taking, you should be in bed drooling all day.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So you were on those medicines for a number of years then, and did they help? Were they effective for you?
I think the beginning, when there were so many medicines, they were really trying to figure it all out. It didn't help in the way it tore my body apart. I mean, I had really horrible side effects. And then also not really being able to be present because I was in this medicine fog. The holistic psychiatrist who really changed everything for me at age 20, that was the turning point because he managed the meds, but he also kind of built me up holistically, diet, exercise, finding a career that I loved. He took my eyes off the problem and the big pink elephant. And when we did that, everything became easier. He was able to wean all but one medicine with that work. And it wasn't trying to fix the issue, it was trying to build me up, and then all of a sudden the need for all the extra stuff wasn't there.
So you felt the support,
Yes.
the understanding, the caring bedside manner, the support, which is what you really, really need. You don't want to be talked down to or anybody being condescending or just looking for the negative. Also look for the positive that the individual has to offer to the world and to themselves. So that was a very pivotal turning point for you, is that person that is got that holistic approach. Take us from there. So you have that experience. Did that start to change things in a positive direction for you, or are you still struggling along the way here and there?
Well, and I think here and there struggling, it depends on your perspective, because a lot of people, they have this idea about mental health or sanity or even self-improvement, consciousness, where everything should be a placid, calm sea and sunshine and roses all the time.
Whisper, don't talk too loud.
Yes, no, and that's not life. I mean, life is full of intensities, but that's what makes it beautiful and it makes it us. And so for me, having that, like, everything was way better. It was way easier. There were still ups and downs, but it wasn't anything abnormal or out of the ordinary. So it wasn't getting lost in the lie of having to have everything be perfect, which I think is what sticks most people, especially overcoming a diagnosis. You think you fail whenever something kind of gets off kilter or off balance.
Right, exactly.
You know? So there were some ups and downs, but he just made me feel good about myself. And our work together was way more about self-improvement. And from there, everything took off. It was way more, it's kind of like having my eyes open for the first time of like, oh, I actually can do things.
Like an aha moment, a brilliant aha moment. So during this period, as you're entering, the 20s, tell us about some of the things you were participating in. Were you working? Were you in school? What were the things that you were still able to do and accomplishing while you were dealing with all of this as well? Which I think is very empowering for people that are watching, who might figure that, if you're diagnosed with something, that means you are home and you're bedridden and you're locked away. But you can still live a life if you deal with it and confront it and hit it head on, which you've done and continue to do. But in the 20s, when you first realized this, that had that aha moment, what were some of the other things you were doing?
Well, it was fascinating because I was kind of a BC student. I wasn't very seriously engaged with anything. I was a dancer growing up, so that was like my creative outlet. But I knew that wasn't long term, but I was lost in what to do next, or if I was really good at anything or capable, because I was grown up taught that when you're diagnosed, especially with this diagnosis, something may happen at any moment. Don't challenge yourself too hard.
Right.
But it was fascinating working with this holistic doctor because it was more about self-improvement and being able to look at the positive of it and deal honestly with the upsets too. I got into a career that I loved. I went from C/B student to straight A student.
And what were you studying?
I was studying speech-language pathology, which is what my career has been the last 15 years, which is a high-end career. I mean, it's all neurology-based. I work with intensive care patients. I have for 15 years.
What was it about that spoke to you? Why did you go into that area?
I've always wanted to help people. And I think the big thing that people don't realize about people who have mental issues, is they are caregivers and healers by nature. And a lot of them are very, very, you can use the word sensitive, you can use the word intuitive, aware, psychic, whatever label you want to put on it. They have the ability to connect so deeply with someone that in its strength form, you can actually help people get better and help yourself along the way with that. When it's not used in a strength form, then a lot of times you take on other people's issues. You get dragged down in the muck, or you try to fix things that actually can't be fixed. And I think a lot of the early years where I was having all those upsets, it was that, basically, where I was caring and I was healing for the people in my life, but I wasn't using it in a way that played to my strengths. Getting into speech-language pathology, working with people who really needed that and were ripe and ready for it, that let me shine in a totally different way. And I've always been fascinated with communication, and not just the words, but the energy that you can be with someone and feeling connected and seen and heard. Yeah, so that I think lit something in me. And from there, everything got easy. I got into a top graduate school, took off from there, top internship.
Now, did you have anybody along the way that was telling you you weren't going to have any of those things happen? Was anybody or in your life shooting that down, saying, no, you're diagnosed with this, that's it. You're going to go, there's a threshold of what you're going to be able to achieve and do. And if so, did that push you forward? Tell us about that.
Well, the person who pops up was my boyfriend at the time, who was very much, it was one of those younger relationships you get into where it's kind of like the man's trying to be the man and control you.
Right.
So there was a lot of that kind of used against me to keep me small and in his little container, the safe box of that. And then besides him, everybody was supportive. I would say the only thing is they did give warning signs. Well, remember, when you're around people, you suck on all their energy and you take on too much from them. So this may be a dangerous career to get to.
Right.
Can you handle a hospital environment?
Right.
So it wasn't like they were trying to shut me down. It was just these like well-meaning warnings. But what that did, it created a doubt in myself when I had found something that lit me up and I knew I could be successful at. So that's when the work really began of trusting my inner voice and finding my true north and going, no matter what anyone else says, I have to just keep following that.
Let's talk about that. That expression, the true north. I know that's very big for you. Let's define what the true north is and how important it is to be in touch with that and actually aim for that.
Yeah. For me, the true north is anything that feels light. And this is a tool from a system I teach called Access Consciousness. They call it the light and the heavy tool. Most of us try to find a true north or a direction to go in that actually makes sense logically. But a lot of times those things aren't fulfilling and they're not really authentic to us. So when you can actually tap into how you feel and the energy that comes up when you think about doing something, that guides you forward in a whole different way. So when you think about doing something and you feel lighter, you're interested, you lean into it.
That's right.
That's your true north. When something feels heavy or you want to pull away from it, that's actually something that probably isn't leading you in the most generative direction. So for me, that's what that true north is. It's constantly questioning, and like an explorer would, they would follow the light as they're moving along the path.
Right, exactly.
That's exactly what it is.
So it's really an amazing story because it is very empowering how you, again, got yourself through school, launched this phenomenal career. Take us through that path too, as you're still dealing with the issues, of course, because they're present, but how would that work? Were there good days, bad days when you were, doing what you had to do? Tell us a bit about that and managing that flow.
I've actually been thanked by many people who've gone through this after they've read my book. They're like, you're the only person who didn't try to make it all okay.
Right.
And I think, again, that speaks to what you said at the beginning of being raw, being authentic and vulnerable. There was no way I could tell this story without actually pulling all the curtains back. Because again, one of the lies that stuck me most is if I'm going to be sane, if I'm going to be accepted, then I have to be perfect and match exactly what people want me to be.
So in that regard, as I mentioned, not everybody is able to just freely do that, to open up their lives, to be vulnerable, to share these kinds of experiences with the world at large. Their fear of being criticized or judged or sized up or rejected or people standoffish, whatever. Did you have any of those fears first before you decided to open up and even write a book and tell your story and share it with the world? Because as you mentioned earlier, you were a brilliant, almost Oscar-worthy actress. So when did you decide to tamper that down and really open up to the world about your story, who you are, and why you're here?
Well, I have the same inner critic that everybody does, and I have the same fears of being seen and judged, or people not liking. I think we all struggle with that, regardless of wherever you are in life. For me, it became way more important to help and uplift the people that I could. And when that target of something greater than myself and my own personal identity, when I could keep my eyes on that, it made everything easier. But I had to work myself through it. I don't think people realize it unless they've grown up with a diagnosis, how stigmatized you are. And for me, having that pink elephant be present constantly, it was a third entity in all my relationships. When do I have to reveal it? When do I have to tell people about it? It's kind of like waiting for the shoe to drop at any moment. It took a lot to get over that, and that was after my holistic psychiatrist, about 10 years or so of my own inner work, and then actually getting to the point where my diagnosis was overturned with another psychiatrist at age 30.
Really?
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting story.
How does that happen? How is the diagnosis overturned?
That you're not actually bipolar.
So what did he say was happening? It just...
They said it's
life?
impossible to tell because it was 15 years ago. I was diagnosed at 14. This was at age 30.
Like it wears off type of thing?
Well, it's not supposed to. It's supposed to be a biological thing that's there forever.
That you deal with during the course of your life.
And whether it went away, whether it was never there, I don't really have an answer. Nobody does.
So did that shock you when you heard that? What was that? Was that liberating, exciting, or maybe it really isn't this? Or were you like, well, all these years I've been operating as if it is? That has to be confusing.
Yeah, and there was some anger there, you know, all the years of being over-medicated and all the struggle and the stigma and all that. But more than anything, it was a relief. And it wasn't an overnight thing. It was 10 years of different doctors weaning me down and down and down in medicine until the point where I was on a minimal dose. So I talked to my doctor one day and I said, I'm on a subclinical dose. I look online, that's exactly what's going on. I'm not having any issues. Is it possible to just try me off meds?
Right.
And she worked with me. She weaned me off over the course of 6 months. She followed me for a year after that. Everything was fine, you know, and eventually she said, I think you have a tendency towards anxiety and severe depression, but you manage yourself with yoga, diet, meditation, all of that stuff, that you kind of have your own toolkit now. Whether it's there or not, we don't have to label you anymore. So that was 10 years ago. I've been off medication and label-free.
So that's that.
Yeah.
That's terrific, huh?
Yeah.
Look at your...
Relief.
Yeah, that really is. So you don't see it as bipolar necessarily now. You just see it as you're human and you experience life and you have different reactions, as we all do. But again, the story is very empowering because there are people who are struggling with a lot of different things. And kids today with the bullying and, like you said, the suicide has gone through the roof. And now we have social media and we have all these external pressures and everything. Through your career, working in that hospital setting, let's talk a little bit about that. How did that help you and enhance? Because you are, in this hospital setting, in touch with people who are going through things. And you have this innate hope and desire to help people heal and see the light, even if they're not going to maybe be around for long, to try to provide a sense of solace and comfort. Tell us about this drive and this need and passion you have for really touching people in such a unique and deep way.
I think the most fun thing for me is when I can actually have a ripple effect in someone's life. And when people actually let me in, that's like amazing, amazing. To have someone who actually trusts you enough to open up and show their deep, kind of vulnerable underbelly, I think is a huge thing. And for me, being an innate healer and a caregiver, and somebody who, again, is very, very sensitive and very aware of other people, working in a hospital felt like second nature to me because it put me to my strengths and made me use my strengths every day. That being said, it's a very stressful environment. Death and dying and anger and interesting personalities working in the medical field. You know, the highfalutin surgeons and everything. There's a lot of dynamics. But the
Many smoke and eat fast food too because of the stress. They're telling us not to, but they do to get through the day.
And you don't take care of your body. Like that's kind of known in the healthcare. I actually do a lot of presentations and in-services on self-care for healthcare professionals because it's just a needed conversation. But it's been fascinating looking at really going into the danger zone of like, you know, you may take on too much. That probably isn't safe.
Well, that's what I'm thinking here with my next thought and question is how, you know, going into that sort of non-peaceful environment where anything can happen and you can see extraordinary things, which are beautiful, the birth of a baby, or somebody, you know, being wheeled in after a car accident or something. How did that not trigger some anxiety and fear of death, fear of loss, fear of anything can happen out of control? How did that not exacerbate some of the symptoms you had dealt with so long in your life, being in that hospital atmosphere? What do you think being in that atmosphere might have helped you be stronger and resilient because you were surrounded that and you were surviving it and you were making an impact?
Well, you learn how to bounce back, and you also learn how to live the tools that you use. And that's so funny because people always ask, what sets you apart from the other life coaches out there? Like, I've lived it. I've been through all of it. And to have these different varied life experiences where your mettle is tested, you put your feet to the fire. Are you okay? And how do you learn to rely on yourself? And again, find that true north, even if it doesn't match other people's. For me, it's fascinating when I work with people privately because a lot of times the thing that they think is the danger zone, the thing that either won't succeed or the thing that it's going to throw them over the edge is actually the sweet spot for them. For me, my sweet spot is when I can get deep involved with people and actually allow myself to be vulnerable and connect.
Right.
But again, that was the danger zone for me because that's apparently what was the issue in my younger years. But it's fascinating. It's taking what's I always say, your most judgeable offense in life and flipping it to your strongest asset. And that's, again and again, what I see in people. Once you're able to make that flip, life is totally different.
You talk about having reached the other side. Let's define, from your perspective, what the other side actually is.
The other side is when you stop judging yourself. That's kind of step number one. So a lot of times being labeled, and I don't just mean having a medical label, but I'm the perfect mom, I'm the one who always messes up, I'm the shy wallflower, all of these different labels we give ourselves or are put on ourselves, they basically tamp down your own self-expression and your exploration and your evolution. So I'd say the other side is really letting go of that judgment and allowing the definitions and the roles to go away. Because from then, it all becomes acceptable. It's all allowed, it's all there, and it's all usable and just makes up the tapestry of life. Instead of actually having one note where you're perfect all the time, you go, you know what, I've been through hard stuff, but it's added richness and flavors, and I've seen things other people have never. I've experienced things other people haven't. And for me, that brings in a more wealthy way of living. And I think a lot of people aren't willing or able to actually, I don't even know, it's kind of like loosening up a little bit and being able to be a bit more out of control and not perfect to be able to experience that.
You and I talked about that at dinner last night when we were preparing for our interview here at the studio today. And we talked about perfectionism. And we talked about how you can really get frustrated and locked into that, trying to be perfect. And I think a lot of people, especially in this environment we're in now, where we're dealing with a lot of things that are filtered, created, not necessarily real, with social media and all these other things. This creating this perfect image, this perfect version of yourself, pleasing everybody, being the best, being number one, always winning. That can be extraordinarily debilitating, limiting, and overwhelming. So when did you go from being the perfectionist, striving always to have to be the best and always accepted and revered and all these different things, to allowing yourself to breathe, still wanting to do great work, still wanting to make an impact that is unique to your perspective, where you like to have things lined up and you like to strategize and prepare, but not fret as much about every single thing and every thought being perfect.
My friend got killed in Afghanistan during the war, and it was fascinating. We didn't really have a deep friendship. We just dated for a little bit. But there was something about seeing somebody in the prime of their life getting extinguished immediately that I kind of went, what am I waiting for?
A wake-up call.
It was a huge wake-up call. And from there, all the things that I was afraid to do, all of a sudden it was like, that's actually nothing.
Right.
That's a made-up fear.
Because this person's gone.
Yeah,
right.
It's a made-up fear, so why not go for it and actually test the waters a bit? And that let me come out of my perfection bubble and my perfect life that I had built. No one would ever know that I had struggled or I was crazy in my early days, right? I had my master's degree, I was working at the hospital, perfect.
Everything lined up beautifully.
Yeah. And this allowed me to be messy. It allowed me to tantrum a little bit more. It allowed me to expose a bit more of my little vulnerable underbelly, like I said before. To be able to actually live more authentically and real, to take risks. And I saw a grief counselor actually right after he had died, and she gave me really good advice. She said, Lauren, you need to really focus on non-goal directed activities. Because I was very much like,
Everything
what's
had a
the next goal?
Yeah,
What's the
right.
next goal?
Yeah, what's the end goal? What's the result of this, right? Exactly.
And even the things that I enjoyed, like yoga and meditation, that was initially just for self-care. And then I was like, well, I'm actually really good at this. I could be a teacher. And before you knew it,
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you weren't necessarily focusing on or enjoying or relishing in the moment. You were so laser focused on the goal. We've got to get to that goal, and the goal has to be something successful, and we've got to win it, and it's got to be the best. So now do you feel you savor the journey more than the end game?
yeah, I like to say they're fun adventures and experiences. And even coming into like a TV interview, like, it's a little nerve-wracking sometimes, where you're like, hey, this is an amazing experience that you can have in your life.
Right, yeah.
So why not look at it as that?
Take on the challenge and learn from it.
Every time I walk on stage, it's the same thing. Oh, there's like 80 people here. I've never done that before. That's a bigger number. I was like, okay, cool. You know what? It's just a life experience.
Right.
What if you actually go and enjoy it?
And then it drives you more.
Yeah.
I did it. Oh, I did that. I accomplished it. And then you want to experience it more. Let's talk about some of that too, because you do all this kind of work. You've become a life coach. You do speaking engagements. You engage with people. Let's talk about that aspect. When did you become the life coach? When did that enter into the picture for you?
I had a lovely meandering path. They're my favorite kind.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Doesn't always have to be a
Yeah.
straight line.
Especially being a perfectionist and goal-driven.
Paved road.
Yeah.
Sometimes a dirt road's good too.
Well, and graduate school was very direct. So then
Yes.
to be able to go on this meandering path where it was all led based on my own journey. I learned yoga and meditation and how that really helped me feel connected and balanced in my body. So then I became a yoga and a meditation teacher, taught workshops and classes. From there, I got into energy work, and that had a sister with the same modality to actually be a life coach and do verbal facilitation with people. And I love that because it's like a coach is someone who roots you and cheers you on.
Right.
But being a facilitator is somebody who really just sparks something in you and allows you to make your own choice and change it. So that kind of all unfolded. But again, everything I did, first and foremost, was for me. Even the energy work and learning the life tools that I use now with clients, it was because I used them. I noticed such a huge change. My self-esteem went up, plus the inner judgment went away. And I went, oh, this is important stuff. And it was just, again, a natural extension to go into teaching and coaching and facilitating because I'm an innate healer and caregiver. So again, it's kind of fascinating when you start to see how you tick to be able to really play to those strengths. And a lot of our self-exploration, for me anyway, I think if you actually just looked at how you tick differently from other people, not that you're wrong, not that you're too weird to be accepted or whatever, you just need to figure it out so you can actually build a life that works for you,
So how do you work with the clients when you have somebody that is in need of the life coaching? Do you work one-on-one, individualized basis? Do you go in groups? Are there workshops? Do you go into a company, work with teams? Tell us about some of the process.
Yeah, I do all of the above,
All of
actually.
the above.
Yes, so I work privately with clients one-to-one, and then I teach workshops, and I run small kind of group coaching programs. I find that's really fascinating because, again, we're facilitating change in people. So when you can actually show up to the table and other people who see things differently actually spark ideas in you and you start to learn from their experience, I notice a lot of people will just change more dynamically that way. So the group coaching is one of my favorites because I like watching them connect and play off of each other. And it's the same thing when I go and speak at corporations. I'll do speaking engagements for kind of the whole group. Sometimes it's just the talk. Other times it's roundtables, which are my favorite. That's, again, bringing everyone together in conversation and facilitating interaction.
You also created this energetics-based system. Tell us a little bit more about that. That sounds really exciting.
Oh, I didn't create it. It's called Access Consciousness are the tools that I use.
Tell us about that. What is that?
It's changed the most for me. I've actually had a lot of change through yoga and meditation and basic self-care tools, art therapy, dance therapy. I've done all of that. But the Access Consciousness system is so different. It actually speaks to you being an infinite being And as such, you're very connected. You are connected with everything and everyone in your environment. And for me, being sensitive, aware, and also, again, that caregiver, that spoke so true to me of like, I've always known I can connect deeply with other people. And they have a set of tools and processes that actually allow you to find yourself in the midst of all of that. So I can be aware and I can work with all of you, but I don't lose me in the process. And for me, that was
happens,
gold.
right? Sometimes you can easily, you're so wrapped up with the needs of everybody else. You know, I talked about that, both sort of caregiver types, where you can be so focused on what everybody else needs and making sure they have that you lose the essence of yourself. You've had that happen over the years as well?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, and I think that's just like, that's the plague of the caregiver and the healer. You know what I mean? I have to heal you before I heal me, or I have to make sure your needs are met before mine can. And so it's fascinating. I find a lot of people who work in hospitals, a lot of teachers, a lot of stay-at-home moms. There are a lot of people, even business people, because they're caring for the business and their team. So it's fascinating how often you see those kind of behavior patterns pop up, but you really have to do the work of, I don't have to give myself up to lead, and I don't have to give myself up to make other people feel better. I can actually lift everybody up in the process.
I bet as you're doing that too, you're also learning extra things about yourself in hearing stories that other people are sharing and relating to you. You may have similar paths, but how they handled something, or some of the things they struggle with, or the fears they have, or hopes and dreams and desires, enhance your own existence too along the way, right? When you're open to all of that.
Yeah. Well, I always love it because if you can see someone else's perspective, your world grows. And if you can deeply connect to somebody else, your world grows. And for me, there's nothing, I'm like, just being able to have people let me into their world, but me also letting them in as well, my world just continually gets greater. And again, it adds that texture and that richness to life. So for me, the people, the interactive component is huge for that.
Why are we living in a time, and probably always have, where everything has to be labeled? Because labels really do play havoc with how we value ourselves, our self-worth, our confidence, our resilience, our self-exploration. We all of a sudden retreat, and we then bury everything inside, and that light that we're all born with sort of gets tampered, and maybe sometimes even extinguished. And I know you work with people to help get deep inside and help sort of reignite that light, that spark that they had initially, like you as well have the spark when you were a kid, and then different things came along the way. The spark is back, the flame is really glowing. Why these labels? Why do we always have to size things up, box it up, and label it?
I think it's just the way this reality is run. And a lot of times people like it because it makes them feel comfortable. They know what they're dealing with, and also it gives them a sense of control. If I can label you, I know where you're coming from, I hold you to that, I know how to interact with you, I can expect what's coming next. It gives you a false sense of safety almost. So when you come out of a label, it can throw a lot of people and ruffle some feathers. But I think it's fascinating to look at, like, even the medical diagnosis. They're there to give information and to help guide the professionals. They're not there as a life sentence.
Right.
And for me, at age 14, sitting on the psychiatrist's sofa, getting the diagnosis, and having him go through the litany of issues that I will always have
to deal with, right?
Always. I went, wow, this is a life sentence. This is a role that will never go away.
And at 14, that's scary.
Well, and
at any age it is, but a 14-year-old, like what?
Well, in my little 14-year-old mind, the only thing that really went through was, well, who would ever want to marry me? And to a 14-year-old, that was kind of like my reference point for life.
I'm
is
no
you're supposed
longer
to
lovable, attractive, all these things come into play. It's got to be very difficult. Yeah.
So like, I think that's the bigger thing with the labels that I talk a lot about, is the fact that they are just there for guidance. They're not there as a definition of self. They're not there as something that has to be taken lock, stock, and barrel. And it's also not a life sentence. You can go beyond it, even if you keep a label. Mine got overturned, yours doesn't have to.
Right.
There's a way just to not have it be the big pink elephant in the room anymore.
Absolutely. You know, they talk a lot lately about this lack of empathy in our world, in our society right now, where people are just becoming, maybe closed off, or self-absorbed, or just, how is it going to benefit just me? And empathy is dwindling a little bit. How important is empathy, being an empath, and how do you define what that is, empath and empathy?
Empath for me is somebody who is just very connected and kind of feel what you feel and see what you see. Almost this superpower to step into someone else's shoes. And that is a highly creative and powerful place to be. No matter what business you find yourself in, what circumstance, what relationship, that ability will really set you apart. But again, sometimes it takes you down the wrong path because you take everything as you and you lose yourself in the process.
Would you say you are an empath?
Yeah. Big time, and having that kind of awareness and that sensitivity, being able again to see the whole picture where a lot of people only see 3 colors and you see like every color in the rainbow, the possible spectrum.
Yeah. So do you ever feel like you're rowing the boat in an opposite direction? And it's harder because they're not getting the empathy, but you are filled with it?
Yeah. I think you have
I
to.
say that because you and I talked about that I'm similar in that way. Sometimes you do feel like, how come that person isn't responding in an empathetic way when that's human nature, it's the human condition, why would they not care? But not everybody operates that way, I guess.
Yeah, well, 2 things. I think the first thing is you can't really expect anything from anybody. So if you're walking in thinking, well, I am very caring and empathetic, so therefore they're going to reciprocate, you're going to always be in a losing pile.
Probably.
Yeah, you're always going to be disappointed with that. That's not a good stance to be in.
Yeah, setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting. Even that, I love that book. It's The Languages of Love, where they talk about how people, they not only express love, but they want to receive it in a different way.
Yeah.
And I think even something like that, where you just look at, okay, this is how I tick, this is how my brain works, this is how I feel and perceive the world, you're totally different. How do you need me to show caring for you? And how can I educate you on how you can treat me? And I think most of us don't go there. We're people pleasing and we're perfecting all these interactions, but we don't ever go, I'm teaching people how I deserve to be treated, and I'm going to honor myself first. And by example, they will learn that, or they won't, and they'll go away, and that's perfectly okay. That's actually sometimes a really good thing.
If they sort of just drop off and they're not there, they weren't necessarily meant to be there, right? They were there just for their own purposes, and then you've had that happen. Some people just sort of phase out a little bit on their own. You didn't phase them out, they just sort of phased out.
Yeah, and as you grow and as you change, I mean, there's a season for everything, right? And I think a lot of times our relationships are the same way. There are seasons, and it doesn't mean somebody won't come back later. I never shut the door to anybody. And some relationships just ebb and flow and change over the years, but the ones where really you're not included and you're only there for them and serving a role, those are the ones that are really important to be able to let go of.
I want to talk more a little bit about the workshops and the individualized coaching and things of that nature. Do you create themes, or are you just working specifically with the issues the individuals are dealing with? How are they actually structured? Do you have sort of a protocol and everything sort of planned, or do you sort of tweak it as you're going along, maybe not cookie cutter, one size fits all? Tell us about that.
Well, and for me especially, because it is about the uniqueness. So, and it's about really being present. And when you're trying to follow a cookie cutter formula, you're immediately out of presence. When you're in conclusion about who somebody is and what they need, you're out of presence. And so to be able to really connect deeply with people, you have to be in question, and you have to really show up in the moment and be willing to move and shift as needed. And I think that's the beautiful thing. There's some hallmarks that I go through. Mainly it's the inner judgment that you have. It's the judgment from the outside that you're dealing with. It's taking away the roles and the labels and everywhere you've looped up your self-esteem in it. It's allowing people to become more aware of their awareness, the fact that they are probably binging off other people constantly, and how not to lose themselves in that. And then finally, we really get into the conversation about what are your gifts in all of this? How do you create with it? And living on that creative edge, you're going to be in your strong point constantly. And it may look totally different than you think it would, but being able to kind of edge into that is really important. So there are some guideposts that we always go through, and I do topic-specific stuff, which is really fun. I just get the hint of, so this is up for people. I'll start having conversations with folks, and my mailing list usually gets the bulk of that. I'll be like, pop-up call on this. It's up for 5 people. I've had these conversations. Come join in,
That's it. Exactly right.
Yeah, so but being able, again, to be present with it and not trying to always do everything X to Y to Z, it allows that to happen.
So you have this incredible book, which I mentioned in the introduction, The Other Side of Bipolar, Revealing Your Strengths to Move Beyond the Diagnosis. Really cool cover, too. It speaks volumes, this cover. This, I know, is a labor of love for you. However, it can get very deep, and you really are very revealing and very open, empowering, and a wonderful mentor and guide in this book from when I read this. What was your initial inspiration to want to put pen to paper and actually write this, tell your story, and do it in the way that you do it that is so helpful for others, where they can really relate? Tell us about that with this.
I was having conversation after conversation with life coaching clients and workshop participants, and every single time I was vulnerable and I said something about my experience, I saw immediately how that shifted them. I am a true believer that there is power in your stories, and everybody's experienced something unique, and being able to claim that for yourself is huge, and that's what the book gifted me, of taking away the stigma and the hiding and all that. But then also to be able to actually see that shift. And as I saw it with people, they just kept saying, you should write a book about this. You should write a book about this. And I had to hear it multiple times and work myself through this, because I knew if I would write a book, it would be vulnerable.
Yeah,
I knew I couldn't
absolutely.
leave a stone unturned,
Yeah,
and I
right.
knew everybody would know every single thing about me.
Yeah.
Which is a kind of uncomfortable spot to be in. But to me, there's no other way, because if I'm going to have the impact I'm going to have.
It's all or nothing. It has to
Yeah.
be. It has to be.
Yeah.
I mean, as you were writing it, were there times where you were like, "Ooh, maybe I shouldn't include that," or "Do I really have to add that in?" Were you questioning yourself at all?
Oh, yeah. And,
You
I,
did,
and I
yeah.
reached halfway through and I went, maybe this is a book for me and not for the main, actually releasing it to anybody else. And the funny thing is that kind of came halfway through, because it got more raw and vulnerable. And then by the end of it, it was not about me and how people would see me or experience me. It was more about what I could perceive would shift for them. And that's so important.
right,
And when you
absolutely.
can get your own identity off something and actually go, no, this is an impact I'm here to have on the world,
Right.
and I want to touch as many people as possible, it becomes way easier.
This must have been a very cathartic
Yes.
and therapeutic experience for you. I mean, you start off in the introduction with "You're not alone," and then part one, you get right into revealing crazy and things like "Am I Crazy?" and "Cabaret" and "Sideways but Straight," "The Party," "The Snake," "Memory," my award-winning performance, my safe haven, and more. Tell us about that, the part one of revealing crazy.
So the book kind of popped out in a very interesting way. It's fascinating. I'm very poetic. I've always written poetry. I've actually never written kind of stories or books this way. So it was kind of snippets from my life, scenes, very poetic and very visceral. I really wanted not only to see and to have people actually kind of hear it, I wanted them to actually feel it and walk
Right.
with me, because I knew that would transform them as they did.
Absolutely, yeah.
So being able to kind of do that, these scenes kind of popped out in mirror images. Part one, revealing crazy. Part two, revealing brilliance. And they're mirror scenes, me dealing with the same thing through the lens of having a diagnosis, and that there's something wrong with me, and that I'm too different to be okay. And then the second half, revealing brilliance, a different lens, the lens of awareness and consciousness, where I'm okay, I have gifts to offer, and I'm just very aware and sensitive to the world, and playing to my strength that way. So being able to kind of have these mirror scenes bounce off each other, I had to go deep with the revealing crazy to actually show people an insider's look about what it's like to be. And I've had so many people who've been diagnosed who said, this could be my diary.
Right.
And so cool, sometimes they say, I never had language to connect to my family or my doctors even.
But in
After
here-
reading this, I now have language to actually open up and share more.
Who can help me now? Darkness creeps in, the diagnosis, being committed to bipolar, cocktail party, my body is angry, my body is a prison. Really incredible. My turn to choose. I like part two, where you talk about revealing brilliance. Tell us about that.
I think it's not unknown, where a lot of people go, there's a hairline difference between madness and brilliance.
Sure.
You know, there's a lot of beautiful creatives throughout the world who have kind of overtly struggled, and they're outliers. They live on the edge. But they do so because they can see things other people can't. The difference between actually kind of being an outlier and actually utilizing it to create a life that works and one that doesn't is being able to kind of play in that space and really kind of harness the creative element to that. So for me, the part 2, Revealing Brilliance, was all about that. It's coming home to myself. It's taking away the self-judgment, the stigma, the definition of me as bipolar Lauren, not just Lauren. And from there, well, what was right about me all those years ago? What's right about me now? And if I stopped living up to other people's version of reality and started to actually create my own.
Right, exactly. Well, your book invites readers to really discover the beauty of who they truly are, right?
Mm-hmm. That's in the tagline. I love it. And for me, that's, I mean, we're all beautiful. And I don't mean physical beauty. I mean that kind of being beauty, where you can feel it. You get around somebody, you relax. They light you up. And it's amazing how often we do that for other people and don't acknowledge it. Just meeting somebody's eyes on the street. It's as simple as that. And when you lift someone up and you have that beauty of uniqueness and difference, and you see things in quirky, weird ways, you create things that no one else can, or you care for somebody the way no one else can. That's brilliant. And that is beautiful. For me, that's the most beautiful thing about any of us.
So do you consider the book, it's a memoir, but is it also a helpful resource? Is it a self-help book? Are there other uses, not labels, we're not doing any labels, but other things that you categorize the book as in addition to your own memoir?
Well, I always say it's a memoir / self-help. Or self-help / memoir. They're kind of one and the same. For me, when I was growing up with a diagnosis, I would read a lot of books, and I found very stale self-help books that felt very impersonal. And I knew the people writing them had no experience with it whatsoever. And I also read a lot of memoirs that were beautiful and inspiring and kind of opened some interest, but at the same time, there was nothing helpful in them. So this is my beautiful way of mashing it up together. You learn to walk with me and learn by example. And people who haven't been diagnosed, they're like, I didn't realize I did that with my body. After reading this, that's changed. It just makes you look at the world differently.
Exactly. Living from the neck up. I love that. Tell us a little bit about that.
That was my perfection years, where all of a sudden I discovered that I was smart. At age 20, when I started getting straight A's at school, I never thought I was smart. I went, oh, wow, look at me, straight A's all in a row. Then all of a sudden it became about the new vestige to be in of like my headspace. And for me, that was almost like what adulthood was, is being able to figure everything out and be consistent in your presentation and make things perfect. But then there was no joy of embodiment. There was no connection. There was a very numbed space. And that's when the yoga started to come in. And I grew up being a dancer. I was very connected to my body. And eventually it just became about, nope, everything comes from the brain. So living from the neck up was that. And then what you see in the subsequent chapters of actually getting back into my body again and tapping into that wisdom and that enjoyment.
Right. I also love reclaiming all of me. That's a very powerful statement because sometimes people don't think they'll ever be able to do that again. Once they're diagnosed with something or once they're dealing with something, even if it's a physical health issue, they feel that the version of all of them is now erased. It'll never be perfect. It'll never be exact. So that process of reclaiming all of you, what is that actually like?
For me, it is a diffuse exploration and actually allowing yourself to really, truly be aware of what you're aware of and know what you know. And what I mean by that is so often we try to match our reality to other people's. Well, if this is what you believe, then I have to believe it too. So anything that veers from it, I can't explore. Instead of actually allowing yourself to go off the beaten path and go, you know what, that may not work for you, but it works for me. And to have these textures of actually going like, I'm not just this one note person, I'm this thing too. And I'm also this thing. And I'm also this thing. And I'm good at this, and I'm really good at this, and I'm not so great at that. Like to actually allow all of that to come in. I love texture and variability, and a lot of us aren't living that way. Reclaiming all of me is that one moment of actually, I'm walking on a path, I'm actually in the woods exploring this.
That was a cool part.
That seed, and
really,
it's pulling in.
You feel as though you're walking with you. I felt that in reading the book, that you're actually there. Watching you do it, but also side by side, which was really, really cool. To be able to achieve that, you're not always able to achieve that sense of really feeling like you're with that person, unless it's a novel or something. So that's amazing you were able to achieve that in the writing of this book.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
really
you.
cool.
Yeah, and that was interesting because I told you last night I wrote half of it, and then halfway through I found that voice. And I went, oh, that's what this needs to be. And I went back and I rewrote the book. And for me, once you find that beauty, that authentic, vibrating, living, breathing thing,
Right.
that's what people connect with more than anything.
First, you have to go through the other part, and then that aha moment comes. We're like, maybe not. That's what I'm used to doing. That's the usual approach. That's how I always start out with it. And then the authenticity shines through. You're like, let me go back in. How did you not try to make the book perfect?
That was hard. That was especially the end, because you always want to wrap it up as in a neat little
Endings
bow,
are harder.
you know?
Yeah.
But for me, again, it was more about that vulnerability. And I did hire a writing coach, and that helped because I could just be raw and real, and I knew she would come in and finesse. And having somebody kind of guide me along the process. Because again, I've always written poetry. I haven't ever written a story, or a 270-page book is a very different kind of undertaking.
It really is. It really. How long did it take? What was the process like?
Writing was 5 months, and then I spent about a year with the publisher in development,
Sort of
cover,
fine-tuning
title
it.
change, all of that stuff. Yeah, so letting the identity of the book come through just took a little time. But I mean, it's just something for me, at the end of the day, I wanted to be able to like be on my deathbed at the end and be like, you know what, I put everything I had into that beauty. And for me, anything short of that wasn't what I wanted to give. I really wanted to kind of have the full breadth of it in there.
Your book is dedicated to those who know more is possible than what they have been told they can have and be. What does that mean? Explain that.
Well, and that's me, you know, and that's a lot of us, is we got a label, we got defined. We're defined by our upbringing. We're defined on the money we come from, what we're capable of, what our test scores
show. The clothes we wear, the cars we drive, the houses we live in, the neighborhoods we live in, all of that, right?
And so many of us actually know more is possible. We sense it deeply and innately, and it pulls us forward. That's that true north again, that pop of interest. And for those who really have been told that they can't have, they can't be, really, is that true?
Yeah.
Or are you ready to start exploring what else is possible?
You know, mental health and the conversation is really in the news right now. Whenever there's a tragedy, whenever there's something that happens, somebody does something to somebody else, whatever it may be, the first thing that they are talking about now is the mental health of the individual. Like, let's see the clues, let's look at their Facebook, let's do this and the other. In your view, why is mental health and wellness, why is that conversation so extremely important to have? It's one of those things that people never really wanted to talk about. Taboo topic, you know, they looked at negatives associated with it, but it's incredibly important to have these conversations about wellness and mental health, right?
Well, and it's fascinating to me because the way the world has been built in the past, it's highly stigmatized, and you weren't supposed to show vulnerabilities. And if your body is sick, you get sympathy. If your mind is sick, people get scared of you.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even being labeled, it was the fear I saw in people, and people who knew me. People who I had connected with deeply would hear the label, and I could watch them retreat away. And the pain of that was so immense. So I think the work that a lot of people are doing to destigmatize and just open the doors to conversation, which is what this book helps, is hugely important for that. I also think that because more people are coming forward with, I was diagnosed, or I struggle too, I'm not perfect, it's allowing other people to go, oh, you know what? I don't have to be perfect either. But when there's the stigma, when there's the fear, when people are locked up and actually have no expression, no safe zone to be able to do that, it makes it worse. When something is secret, the secret grows until it's so big it overpowers everything. And all of a sudden it's something that needs to be hidden and needs to be protected and defended. And that's a really hard way to live.
It really is.
So being able to have these conversations, even when you're kind of just on the cusp of it, it becomes a preventative measure. And the more open we can be without judging it and without making people wrong, but hey, what are you aware of here? Maybe you see the world differently. What tools do you need to navigate this life? It's going to take the stigma away.
And it's about reclaiming the hope and the lightness and the joy of life, right? Because we tend to sometimes, like I said, extinguish that, or we don't focus on it like we used to, and it disappears. And your work is about showing people and helping people have those things return to their life, right?
Well, my podcast is called the Lighten Up Podcast, which people always think is funny because I talk a lot about mental wellness and mental health and sense of self. But for me, it's really about not being light and airy where you don't look at things.
Right.
Because I think accountability and honesty, like brutal honesty, is the gold maker.
Important.
If you're willing to be that, things change. But also not getting mired in the heaviness, because that doesn't help anybody either. And I worked at the hospital in life and death scenarios. Even in that environment,
right, yeah.
adding some levity to it actually makes it easier to change. So for me, cutting clear eye, clear mind, straight to the heart of the matter. And then from there, looking at like how you can shed these extra heavinesses that we're all living under, these dark clouds.
Now, you work with college kids and corporate leaders and CEOs and really their wide scope and breadth of people, right? Tell us about the different kinds of backgrounds that people have, your clients.
Yeah, I'd say the common thread is probably the caregiver role, and caregiver outside of the box. So it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to like care about somebody or for somebody, but you're caregiving in a way where you're building a life. You're fostering a life, you're fostering relationships. And I think a lot of people have angst around that. A lot of the upsets, the stressors in our lives come from other people.
Right,
They're the most stressful aspect. That's one of my presentation slides of like the bigger stresses, people, you know?
Absolutely.
Because you can't control it. And so being able to navigate the ever-changing landscape of other people's stuff, I think is kind of the bigger breadth of the work that I do. Because again, we get lost in other people. We get lost in the expectations they have and what we have to be for them, so that we don't ever really build our own self-reliance and our own self-trust. And that is like the greatest self-care tool out there. It's not, I'm gonna go away to the spa for 2 weeks. If you can do the work on building your self-awareness and learning how to be reliant on you, everything becomes easier. You don't need a vacation anymore. Your life becomes that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Talked a lot about perfectionism. What is this phrase, perfection insanity? I mean, there is something like that? Tell us about that.
Perfection insanity was kind of my part 2, which is funny. Like the revealing crazy, you'll see the beginning part of it is actually the diagnosis. The second insanity step I went into was perfection. And I did that as a way to fix myself and a way to hide my diagnosis. A lot of other people do that because they don't feel like they're good enough, so they have to push to perfection. Or they just kind of think that's the way I'm going to be happy, is if I meet some sort of certain landmark that I've set for myself. But the amount of energy you have to employ and your body holds and the tension that comes when the expectations aren't met, or when it's all about reaching that goal or having a life that looks good on the outside but is totally unfulfilling on the inside, that's a lot of the pain points people are in. They feel empty, they feel numb because they're living a life that looks good from the outside, but if you look deep down, it's not quite them.
It's not quite them.
It's not quite them. Yeah.
The tagline for the business, empower the one, empower the many. I love that. Tell us about that.
I'd really love to see a global shift. You know, to be able to actually have a world that is kinder and more empathetic, and also more conscious, meaning that people have eyes open and they're present with what is, not living in some false reality of social media or, you know, having that outward appearance while the inside feels so hollow. So for me, if you empower one person, you touch one person, all of a sudden it lifts up the whole. It's a way to change the collective. And I really look at that like, who was it? I think it was Emerson who said that. You know, if you make one person breathe easier, you've had a successful life. And I really feel that when you can touch one person and when they become empowered to step into them, it has a ripple effect. And if you can do that with many people.
So it's very pay it forward.
Yes.
You believe also in the law of attraction? And do you believe that the energy that we put out, whether it's positive or negative, we tend to get back?
I have a different perspective with that. I say yes, it's kind of a sister perspective. For me, it's like your point of view creates your reality, which again comes from the access consciousness system. So whatever point of view you have, that's your reality as you know it. And so if you have the reality that money is really hard to come by, you're always going to create money is really hard to come by, or people don't love me, or no one appreciates me. or I'm too different and I have to hide it. All of those point of views that you have, they're like self-fulfilling prophecies. Yeah. Where they just kind of show themselves one after the other. So when you can change your point of view, you actually change the energy, which then changes the outward appearance and the whole situation. So being able to kind of make that kind of ground, that grassroots shift in your own perspective of the world and how you experience it changes everything. And that in of itself starts to bring greater into your life, because then you have healthier perspectives. I am worth something. I'm worth honoring. People show up who treat you that way.
So the family, the friends, the colleagues, as these shifts have happened in your own life, what have they said? What has been their response? How have they shared and celebrated your hope, your lightness, and your joy with you?
Oh, my grandma pops to mind. She always says, "Lauren, you're so brave." And like, it's so funny because the things that you don't really see in yourself, a lot of times other people do.
Right.
And the bravery.
And that could go either way.
Big time, you know?
You said that fast. Been there, done that?
Been there, done that. Yes, the good and the bad, absolutely, the underbellies.
Write it down. I'll get back to that. Duly noted. That's been duly noted.
You know, it's nice to kind of have those mirrors, because sometimes they will call you out on your stuff.
Sometimes, right, it's something that you don't want to look at, and then like, okay, I do have to deal with that. Right, exactly.
And then I'm always surprised by the people who are actually really supportive, or I'll open up about my diagnosis to somebody, you know what I mean? Like a work colleague where you're here being a professional. And it's amazing, the support, but also the interest that they have. I'm like, wow, this is amazing.
Because they may open up to you, because you open up to them like, well, let me tell you about some of the things I've been dealing with, which that's beautiful when that happens, right? Sometimes you can't script that, you can't prepare for that. What's that like when that happens for you? You could be anywhere and somebody just feels so comfortable that they open up to you. And what's great about it is you're unbiased as the coach. And sometimes, as we all know, that you can be boxed in, labeled, sort of sized up by your family, your friends, even your colleagues, where they've known you so long, they sort of think that this version that they see of you is the only version you'll ever be. You won't evolve, you won't change. Don't even waste your time, don't bother with that. You're always going to be that way, you're always going to react that way. So the fact that you can work with folks with your own perspective and experience, but yet at the same time be relatable, but at the same time be unbiased and non-judgmental, that is huge, because that helps them make significant progress, right?
Yeah. Well, the beauty of that is you're not going to judge them so they're open, but also because you don't judge them and you don't buy into anything, they can see for themselves when they're lying to themselves. They can see for themselves when they're shooting themselves in the foot. And for me, it's fascinating when you're trying to be empathetic. A lot of us are taught that we have to like match the story and like meet them there, and it gets heavier.
To sort of reinforce their story and agree with it.
Yeah, but then it locks it in deeper, and you can stick people dynamically that way. If you're actually not judgmental, if you don't agree or align with it, and you let them go, wow, that's really interesting. Is that working for you anymore?
No biases.
They can kind of go, oh, wait a second, it's actually not. And because it's light, because there's breathing room around it, they can see more and they can actually change more. But I was on the phone with the bank the other day, and it's funny, you know, I was talking about this, that, and the other, and I mentioned my book, and she goes, oh, what is it? And again, it's somebody who has a family member who's dealing with it. So you never really know who you're talking to, but she went on Amazon and bought it right away. You know what I mean?
Did she really? That's fantastic.
That's happened quite a few times.
You know, a lot of times we all know somebody who's dealing with something. And we go through life dealing with various things too, where we're unsure, and where there's anxiety, and there's depression, and fear, and risk-taking, and all these different things. And, you know, it's wonderful that you have the opportunity to really engage with people in the way that you do through all these tools and resources that you have, with the website, the workshops, the coaching, the book. What do you hope people truly get out of this effort, out of your story, out of all of this work that you've put into this over the years?
Well, that they're not alone. I think that's the biggest thing. And
Did
sometimes
you felt alone?
Oh, hugely. And sometimes you're alone in your awareness, where you don't have an issue, but what you're aware of you can't share with anybody. So then you start feeling isolated. So just knowing sometimes that what you're aware of and dealing with is different than what I am, but at least I know that there's somebody else out there looking at it and dealing with something too. It makes me feel less alone. It gives me hope that there's possibilities to move forward. And I think the bigger thing with my business in general is just there's always more available. There's more to you as an individual. There's more to you as part of the whole, part of the collective. And there's more to experience in life, good, bad, ugly, otherwise. There's more textures for all of us.
I know you'd like to see some shifts in, some paradigm shifts in the mental health community. What would those be?
Well, for me, the two biggest things that shifted stuff was the holistic perspective, where when I ended up on a doctor's couch, and it wasn't just about medicine, it wasn't just about labels, it was about diet, exercise, self-esteem, and life development.
So you'd like to see more of that,
more of
as
that,
opposed to just that traditional way of medicating and just...
Yep. Let's put the whole thing together and look at you as a unique individual. And then the second thing that really changed was energy psychology. And that is really looking at what our first language is, a lot of energy, where when I walk into a room and my stomach flips over and anxiety comes out of nowhere and you think it's yours, you don't look at the fact that you were fine a second ago. Perhaps it's something in the room that's making you feel that way.
Triggering it.
And we have a lot of words for emotions, and they're easy to pinpoint. We don't have a lot of words for energy because there's more infinite of them. If you're willing to start looking at it from that perspective, you don't have to do anything with it. There's just something that's here, and I'm aware of it, and it's making me feel uncomfortable. But once you acknowledge it, it just starts to go away. And so being able to really look at the energy psychology part of it is you're aware, you're sensitive, you're psychic, you're empathic. Okay, cool. What do you need to attend to in every moment to continue to move your life forward? You don't get lost again.
Right, exactly.
You don't get lost in the noise.
You don't get lost in the noise,
Yeah.
which a lot of people are. You talk a lot about lighting up your living and sense of self, which can seem a little bit like a paradox to a degree, especially to the intense subjects that you cover. How do these things go together?
Well, for me, again, it's about that honesty factor and calling a spade a spade. If you can do nothing else but develop that skill set of calling a spade without judging,
that's what it is.
So much more easy to move through life.
Sure.
And for me, once you're able to do that, everything gets lighter and easier because you start to see things the way they are. If I'm talking to somebody and they're smiling and saying wonderful things, and underneath them I can feel like they really don't like me and don't want to be talking to me, I can call a spade a spade. I feel lighter because of it, and then I can make my own choice.
Can you spot the other brilliant actresses and actors out there? Having been one yourself?
Yeah.
Like,
And
this person is not being authentic.
No, and it's fascinating how often you kind of flip into that sometimes, you know, to be able to really kind of pull yourself back and see people and don't judge them for it. That's where they're functioning from. But when you can start to see how their words don't match the energy that you're aware of, you stop feeling crazy and lost or like you have to fix it. You can just go, oh, that's what that is. And then you make your own choice. So sometimes it's having the honesty, but that lightens it up, and that's what brings the change. It's really the lightness of it all that lets you move.
I was going to say, I would imagine too, because we talked a lot about, you know, taking lemons and turning them into lemonade, that you also probably look at some of the experiences that you've been through with the diagnosis and other things of that nature. And then, of course, that diagnosis not being in effect anymore, that label. It's the experiences you've had in the realm of mental health have given you a unique perspective, almost a texture and a richness that you might not have had otherwise in understanding and really appreciating the human condition and what people go through and what our struggles are and our fears and our hopes, dreams, desires. So do you embrace all of this and everything you've been through as almost a positive in a way, even though it's had its things you've had to deal with, which people watching this right now might be dealing with themselves. And this may help them, this conversation, and looking at some of those strengths, those talents, the positivity of the uniqueness of what they're going through. Have you embraced it in that way to say, you know what, some of these ways I think, these perspectives I have, the approach that I have, the way I'm so effortlessly able to deeply connect and touch other lives in a positive way, might not be the case if I hadn't experienced what I've experienced in my life in dealing with mental health.
Yeah, it's a rare strength, and it's a rarity to find somebody who has gone through the deep dark of it and come out so successful on the other end that not only are they okay and like themselves, that's a huge thing, but also have enough tools, wisdom, and practices that they can then pass on to shortcut other people's paths. And that's really what I bring to the table. And really, all the mentors I've chosen to work with, they've had similar things. I'm always drawn to those folks who've been in the muck of it and came out, and who are honest about it. Nothing ever is always, I'm wonderful and I'm perfect.
Pollyanna.
It's not Pollyanna, and it's hard because I think one of the greatest lies about mental health and recovery is that, again, things will turn into a placid, calm thing where you never have ups and downs, you never struggle. There's a numbness to it that's really bought and sold. And I think that's what sticks a lot of people, because if you do have that variability, you want to shut down, you think there's something wrong. It's not, that's just life. And so being able to actually have those wide experiences that I've had is a strength for working with people, and being able to speak from that space where I'm not expecting other people to be perfect. Or to build a life where they just feel like, it's not that.
Right.
I'd rather have one that's textured and layered, and it didn't happen overnight. I was angry a lot of years. I was upset. I still have my ups and downs. It's a lot to go through. But on the other end of it, the other side of it, you really do see the beauty of your experience and what you can now offer others with it. And that in of itself is a life maker to me.
Absolutely. Moving past mental health is possible. And you tell people that in the book, walk them through your own journey beautifully in this book, and discover the new tools that are available from traditional and alternative modalities. Because again, people might not realize watching this right now that help is available, guidance, mentorship, coaching is available. What has been the response to this book from readers and the public at large, and even maybe the mental health community? I'm sure people are really moved by this book and helped by it.
It's been fascinating to hear the different conversations. I had someone contact me who said, I just touched your book and a wave of compassion washed over me. And to have that kind of impact on anybody is huge. I have heard from mental health professionals who wanted different ways to talk to people, and they wanted an insider's look, and felt like this was amazing because I actually laid out the whole experience so that they had a better idea and could be more empathetic, and also have different ways to work with people based on the tools that I share. I've had a lot of people who've gone through it themselves, who again get language to help express themselves. And believe it or not, I have a lot of family members who reach out to me who are like, my loved one never really wanted to deal with it, would never be open to kind of exploring it, but me reading this actually gave me more of a sense of peace with them and an appreciation of them as an individual. So all of those things are amazing, and hearing from people who've never been diagnosed but just felt a little off, a little different. They just are like, I can now explore all aspects of myself, and not only is it okay to do that, it's actually something that will serve everybody if I allow myself to do that.
Well, like you say, the other side of bipolar will empower you to create a phenomenal life and reconnect with the beauty of who you truly are. That's a beautiful thing. I mean, really, you've been through it, you're open, and not everybody is able to do that, but maybe now by watching this, by reading your book, maybe even connecting with you on the workshops and the individualized coaching, it could really be life-changing, can it? When you have an opportunity to really be heard, understood, because sometimes people just want to be heard and understood, and appreciated and respected.
You see me.
Right.
And that's sometimes all you need, is that little touch of, wow, somebody sees me. That's what one of my coaching clients had said that. She said, not only do you see me, but she says, you, like that Rumi quote, you meet me in the field. And when you meet me there, I have to be bigger, and I have to not judge myself, and I have to actually see myself more clearly. And she says, every session that we do together, it's that. And so when we stop doing our session and we hang up the phone, I'm still in that space. And eventually you start seeing yourself in that light. You're bigger, you're bolder, you're more brilliant than you give yourself credit for. And you need people in your life who encourage your bigness that way. And that's goosebumps, It's
like the words in that song, I can see clearly now the rain is gone. It's very much like that. It's like an awakening in a way, right? Or a rebirth, or reconnecting with the essence of who you really are and who you're meant to be.
And like, wow, I'm really cool. I didn't know that.
Exactly.
And that happened time after time for me. I'm like, wow, that's kind of cool.
Right.
And then you hit the moment where you're like, there's no other person I'd rather be than me. And that's kind of a really cool aha to have. There are
Yeah.
things in my life I'd still like to move and change. We're all
Sure.
doing that. But like to actually be here in this person, this body is like pretty cool.
Well, I'm so happy you brought this person and this body to our studio because it was an amazing and insightful conversation. And I do hope people really, really watch this. They get the book, they connect with you for the workshops and the coaching. Go to your website as well and just learn about the opportunities to really to heal and to progress and to thrive and to rekindle the joy and the hope. If somebody's watching right now, before we wrap up, what would be one thing you'd want to say to them right now if they're in the depths of despair and they feel there is no hope? I'm not worthy of having any attention on me. What would you say to them right now?
Baby steps. Don't overlook the small wins. I didn't have like one huge aha and then my life changed. It was a daily practice, a daily work. And truly, like, I got out of bed today. You know, wow, took a shower today.
That's a plus.
Connected with someone new today. You know, I went 5 hours without judging myself. Actually being able to take those baby steps, it's easier to access when you're in the pits because a lot of people they can't meet you there, so they try to get you to shoot for the moon. Sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not. Just take whatever thing that you can today to have gratitude for yourself and to go, maybe I'm not happy, but I'm okay. And you know what, tomorrow will be better.
Absolutely. Beautiful words said by author Lauren Poli. It's a pleasure to have you here and to meet you in person after we've done the radio shows together. The book is The Other Side of Bipolar. Again, revealing your strengths to move beyond the diagnosis. It's available at Amazon and also at her website. A blessing and a joy to have you with us, Lauren. Thanks for coming. I know you're so busy and sharing your story with us, being so open and impactful and insightful, because you never know who's watching and a life that can be changed in such a beautiful way just by hearing this conversation. Wishing you nothing but continued success in your life and everything that you're doing, and continue to shine the light on others and touch their lives in such the beautiful way that you do.
Thank you so much, Jim.
It was a pleasure. Nice to meet you. And we'll see you again, I'm sure. And you'll probably got another book in the offing.
I'm starting to write it right now.
Starting to write it right now, so stay tuned. If you'd like to learn more about coach and author and just extraordinary Lauren Poli, all you have to do is go to her website, laurenpoli.com. Learn about the workshops and the coaching, the fabulous book, The Other Side of Bipolar, and so much more. The book is also available at amazon.com. For everybody at CUTV News, I'm Jim Masters. Thanks for being with us. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you again next time.